follow Sharon's advice to be laser focused. And in doing that, I'm actually going to be focusing on two main things. I'm just going to share my screen with you about writing spiritual memoir. And well, one is about writing it and one is more about sharing it and platform growing. Since The Minister's Wife was published, and I've spoken with writers who are interested in talking about this sort of thing, I find two questions keep coming up most often. One is about how we write our stories in relation to other people's stories, and the other is about how we are in the world as writers. So mostly we use the word platform for that. So those are the two things I'm going to share with you. My hope is that this will be fun and casual, and that you might leave with the feeling of having a little bit more freedom in your writing and about your writing, no matter what stage you're at. As Sharon outlined, we're going to have questions and discussion at the end of our hour together. And I encourage you to use the chat throughout. You can write questions or comments there that we can look at later, or just kind of cheer each other on. I think that's part of who we should be in the world as writers with each other, is cheering each other on. So that is my hope. So spiritual memoir has become more and more important to me as a reader and a writer. The stories of other people's spiritual journeys can help us with our own, help us understand the path we're on and our faith, and remind us that we're not alone. So in the next hour, as I've already mentioned, we're not going to crack the spiritual memoir nut, so to speak. We're going to laser in on those two areas that I told you about, but after, when we do the Q&A and discussion, we can broaden it out as far as we want. So I want to talk about how we write about other people in our lives without getting into trouble, and how do I build my presence as a writer in the world to help me do that kind of writing. And as Sharon mentioned, no writing workshop is complete without that sinking feeling brought on by a writing activity. So we're going to throw in a little 10-minute guide at writing time for fun. No pressure, just invitation. So let's position ourselves a little bit, first of all, in the genre of spiritual memoir. So Andrew LePew, in his excellent book, which I commend to you, called Write Better, writes that all writing is autobiography. He says, if I write a book on structural engineering that never uses first person singular or tells a personal anecdote, it is still autobiographical. It chronicles what I learned and thought about the topic. And of course, he writes, personal spiritual writing has been around for a very long time. Augustine has been called the father of spiritual memoir. There is incredible power in sharing our own stories, our first person account of living in the world. That's what much of the Bible is: the Psalms, the stories, true accounts of people working out their relationship with God and their faith. I really like that, to think about the Psalms as a form of spiritual memoir, a true recording of angst, discovery, questions, answers, resolution, pain, joy. For me, the Psalms are terrifying, tender, and true. And in each one of them, there's usually a mini journey. And in spiritual memoir, there is also some kind of journey toward understanding, hopefully beautifully rendered. So writing spiritual memoir, our story with God, is a good thing to do. It's worth doing, and you will gain courage as you write. So I'm going to share an email that I received this week from a reader of The Minister's Wife, which brought me to tears. It was such a beautiful email to receive, but it speaks to the heart for me and the value of spiritual memoir. Thank you for writing this book. Reading it has made me more present to parts of my life that I had overlooked or minimized. Your journey has freed me to embrace my own more fully. Thank you for your honesty. The book reminds me of a long psalm in a way, a crying out from your experience about God's faithfulness and the pain and joy of the moment. I share that not about my book, but about spiritual memoir and how it can tend to other people and be a balm, as it has been in my life for the beautiful spiritual memoirs I've read. So Frederick Buechner, in his book, Listening to Your Life, wrote, "The story of any one of us is in some measure the story of us all. And that really is the power of sharing our true and tender stories. So, for spiritual memoir to work, it has to be honest. And we have permission to be honest. And we can find that in scripture. So, scripture is full of honest exploration. Thomas is my honesty hero in scripture. He is, honest Thomas, telling what his big question is in the midst of people who he might have felt didn't share his question and is doubting and is exploring. So, but he turned the light on in the room. And then the story of Mary and Martha, we see that same kind of honesty. Martha saying, "Where were you, Lord, when my brother was dying?" Such honest questioning. Our stories are messy. We have questions. We've experienced good and bad, love and hate. We've risen to the occasion and we've fallen flat on our face. It's okay to write about the whole of our lives and the whole of our stories. So let's remember that we're rarely the only people in the room thinking a thought or asking a question or feeling what we're feeling. We don't need to pretend or present ourselves as more together than we are. And it's better to be honest than on mission when we're writing as Christian writers. So, for example, if I set out to write something about God's grace, which is beautiful and wonderful, but I'm intent on convincing people and even converting people, when I am writing in that posture, I don't think we're always doing our best writing. In those first drafts, it's better to be exploring, to be not sure where we're going to end up. And our writing is better when we take that exploratory posture. And that doesn't mean that you can't go back in your sometimes hundreds of rewriting going through your work to bring forward themes, to identify themes and highlight them and magnify them. But in the early days of your writing spiritual work, it's better to have the posture of student and not teacher. So we are especially free to do this because God can handle it. If we believe that God is the ultimate truth, He can handle our stories and our searching, our memories, and our searching for meaning. But a big question we all have to deal with is, can our families handle it? Rosemary Wolfe, who's the mother of the writer Tobias Wolfe, and his brother is also a writer. Tobias wrote a famous memoir called This Boy's Life. She said, "If I'd known both my boys were going to be writers, I might have lived a little bit differently." So I think people who are in families with writers sometimes might get nervous and think, what are you going to say? What story are you going to tell? Do I get to see it? So I want to toss around some ideas about writing well about other people, because I really think this holds writers back. It is a stumbling block for a lot of us starting out, because of course our stories are interconnected with other people's stories. We bump up into each other all the time. I'm going to begin with a very big generalization, and that is that generally speaking, people don't mind being written about if they are treated with generosity and empathy. So I'm going to share a couple of examples from The Minister's Wife. I wrote a chapter on death and funerals, funerals it's called, which my publisher had asked me to do. My editor asked me, in fact, to write about heaven. And I was quickly realized there's not a lot I can say. I have not yet been there. I don't know anything about heaven, but I can write about, what we might slot as the opposite, funerals and death and grief. Because that's been, of course, part of our lives as being married to a minister. So as I began to write that chapter, though, I realized that I was starting to write about my sister. My writing was moving me in the direction of writing about my sister, who had experienced tragedy in her life and a lot of sadness. So what I chose to do as a writer at that point was I went and asked her, even for permission to even write about it. I hadn't even begun yet. I just felt myself writing in that direction. Hers was the only story that I treated that cautiously. I asked her if I could explore this, and I promised to show her, and she let me. And she saw it at every stage. Now, partly I asked her, and this is, I guess, a confession. I wasn't only being nice or considerate. I also didn't want to spend a lot of time writing something that I might come to really like and then have to get rid of it. So for me, it was kind of a pragmatic question too, getting permission ahead of time. I just didn't want to write something that I would later have to cut. And I didn't want it to seem sneaky either for her. And it was easier for me to ask first. And it meant also me telling about her children and how she'd left the Jehovah's Witnesses and was living in estrangement from them. So that was how I handled that. The other example from The Minister's Wife is a picture, a sketch, if you will, of a woman who talked too much. In a chapter on community, I have a scene where I am driving to a women's conference, and I'm driving a woman in our church who talked the whole time. And it was like a 2-hour drive. So it was a lot. And I was very impatient, and I was finding it difficult to deal with. And then subsequently, I had a very humbling experience at the women's conference. And it sort of enabled me to appreciate my driving partner in a better way. So I wrote that, and then not thinking my book was necessarily going to be published. And then I realized, oh, it actually is. I need to share my material with the people in the book. And I didn't use names, but so I emailed her and I literally said, friend, do you remember that drive? And you talked a lot. And I wrote about it, and here it is. And I just had to be completely forthcoming and transparent with her. And she didn't mind at all. It was really amazing and wonderful. And she gave me a great gift by allowing me to do that. But I just had to be completely forthcoming with it. And then the other issue is people in our church. I worried about that. I worried more about people in our church now than people in past churches. I worry that the people in our current church will not trust me as much as they might have otherwise. Or are they going to think that in 10 years, I'm going to write The Minister's Wife Returns, and, there they'll be in that book. So, and I've already had my sister, shared some funny story and then said, don't write about that. So there is a cost, that you might have to pay when we write about how our stories bump up to other people's. It's a risky business. And some people might not like you as much after they read your book. And this all takes courage. So for spiritual memoir, you need both humility and courage. I'd like to say that even fiction writers have to think about this. Novelists often pull from their own lives, and characters might recognize themselves. Someone told me the other day, or maybe I heard it on a podcast, that the short story writer Alice Munro, who's a Canadian literary hero to a lot of us, was not liked in her hometown for a very long time because a lot of her storylines and characters were pulled from real people. So even fiction writers have to grapple with this. We're always pulling in from our own lives. But as I write, one important posture I have is that if there's someone with something to learn, it's me in the stories I tell. I don't tell my hero stories, if I was to have any. I tell my student stories, and that gives a lot of freedom to the writer. So Mary Karr, who's a wonderful writer and has written very beautiful and powerful memoirs where her family was chaotic and sometimes awful. I mean, there's bullet holes in the walls in Mary Karr memoirs. She offers some good pointers in her book, The Art of Memoir, which is a wonderful book if you're going to write in this way. So she talks about notifying people in advance, telling them in detail what you're writing about, the worst of it, just laying it out there, as I did with the woman who talked too much. But she says, don't show them the actual writing. until you're done, because what you don't want is for them to make their decision or give you a reaction based on early first drafts that aren't polished, that aren't beautiful yet. So you're more likely to get a positive response if they're seeing a finished piece. Um, she says, if you're writing about somebody you hate, do it with great love. Write others as you would want to be written about, is how I would interpret that. As writers, we hear the advice all the time: show, don't tell, even more so when you're writing about other people. So if your mother was an alcoholic and that's going to be part of your story, don't call her an alcoholic, show her drinking. So avoiding labeling people is a good technique. Consider that you might be wrong, Mary Carr says. So try to understand deeply the role that other people played in your life, what their motivations were. If somebody completely denies something, then she says to cut it. Her practice is not to write at length about people she doesn't like. So that's a good rule right there. That would save you from a lot of pain and trouble. And memory issues, if someone's memory was totally different about an event or occurrence, she mentions that in her book. And Terry Westover, if you read Educate It, does that well as well. So the other thing I would add to this would be Nadia Bolz-Weber. Years ago, I heard her at a talk at the Festival of Faith and Writing at Calvin College, and she said, write from your scars, not your wounds, which every time I read it, I have to think about it and get it right, what the order of things. But of course, the wounds come first and the scars show healing. And I think that's really important, that we can journal about whatever we want, whenever we want. But in terms of publishing work that involves ourselves and other people, we want to write from a place of healing. So here is a bottom line: can you sleep at night? That is the main indicator of whether you are ready to write about other people, or whether you are ready to show it to them, whether you're ready to publish it. And so before The Minister's Wife came out, I did that work of showing people everything and getting permission. And I didn't ask permission, though, I will say. I just shared it and said, look what I've done. And surprise, it's going to be published. And then I just let people respond, generally speaking. So now that you have permission and confidence, I want to shift gears and talk about platform. And again, the reason I'm kind of jumping a little bit from the topic of writing about other people to platform is that these are the two areas that I find a lot of writers struggle with. So platform is the space you occupy in the world and in the writing world. It's the place from which you work. Can be it'd be too simplistic to say that it's how well known you are, but sometimes it feels like that's what it's about. So Andrew LePew, again, in that wonderful book, Write Better, says our platforms are a mix of visibility, credibility, and community. I really like that. So it's not just about how many followers you have on Twitter or how many people watch your Instagram live videos. It's about your whole network and how you are in the world. So when I started to think about The Minister's Wife and platform and so on, I started to watch other writers, see what they do. I intentionally followed people that I like, writers that I read, to see how they interact with platform issues and how they are on social media and what they do on their website. So this is a wonderful area in which you can copy and learn and be inspired by the work of other people. For me, a lot of what I was seeing didn't fit with me. It would have been agony to do a lot of live Instagram videos from my messy bedroom. I couldn't do it. And I didn't want to do it. But it is good to get a little uncomfortable, but not in agony. So Allison Williams is a writer, and I'm going to give you a way to look her up in a few minutes. From Brevity, which is an online journal. And she wrote an extremely helpful piece about platform, where she likens platform to a bridge. which I loved. I love that idea of platform as bridge. So how you connect with your readers and the people that you are sort of trying to serve with your writing. And her big thing is focus on your writing. Beautiful writing can still get published. And no matter if you have a platform or not, it's just much more difficult. She very helpfully says the vast majority of books are written by people who were not famous before publishing, and most of them still aren't. I don't know about you, but I find that a huge relief. And when my agent was shopping around the minister's wife to different publishers, we did get asked, like, how many followers, how many speaking events does she do every year? And I'm like, I speak at the Sunday school grade 6 class every 6 weeks. That's my speaking platform. Like, I had to be really obviously transparent and say that's not part of who I am. But what I've done is written this book, and we found a publisher who was, willing to take me on because of the book and not because of how many Twitter followers I had. So that can still happen. So if you are hoping to go down that road and it hasn't happened for you yet, keep doing the beautiful hard work of writing well. So yeah, Williams again says the writer's platform is the excellence of her writing, her fascinating emotional journey, and hopefully publishing short pieces that build her readership and reputation. Having followers and fans who will advocate for your book definitely helps you appeal to publishers, but writing a great book is more valuable still. And so that is full of hope for every writer. What we can control is our craft, and that is what we should be focusing on definitely, obviously, in the writing stage. So I wanted to point out these people to you. For me, these are excellent bridge builders. So if you go to brevity.com and search for Get Platform, Build a Bridge, you'll find the article I was referring to. And I wrote there, repeat whenever needed, because friends, it can be a disheartening journey toward publication, or feeling like, who am I to do this? And what do I have to offer? And how can I possibly, become big enough to get published? Well, go back and read this article whenever. My friend Anne Margaret has a wonderful new e-newsletter that's coming out, and that is something that writers are encouraged to do. And hers I would commend to you. I just have to move forward too much there. It's wonderful. It's practical. It's short. It's light. It's warm. It gives some ideas for like a fun activity or a tip. So that's a good one to check out, to be inspired by. On Instagram, someone who I think does something really well that's not so scary. His tag is Walter WTS, reading and reflecting on great Christian books. He's got like 12,000 followers, I think. And he's just literally sharing great Christian books that he's reading. And I don't know what his long-term plan is. I don't know if he's actually trying to build a platform, but he is doing it by serving a group of people. He's building a community of people who follow him and are served by him. And so that's just a beautiful way to look at it too. The last point I've got there is my friend Maggie Rowe, who I think is on the call, but she wrote this book called This Life We Share, Reflections on Journeying Well with God and Others, which came out at around the exact same time as The Minister's Wife did. And what Maggie and I did together at the suggestion of our publishers was we joined together and did video chats about different topics that were common to both books. And we recorded them. I was in my kitchen sometimes, I was in my bedroom other times, and she also was, in her house. This was at the height of the first months of COVID. And again, the idea was to give something to people, to contribute to a conversation or a community. And I just love that idea again of walking across a bridge to meet your readers, as opposed to shouting at them everything you know from a platform. So I'd like to just kind of leave you with those thoughts on platform and hope that it can encourage you in what is actually one of the most discouraging parts of trying to kind of make it as a writer. So now, again, what is a writing workshop without feeling badly about the writing you do during a forced writing exercise? So what we hoped to provide you with was about 10 minutes, which probably feels short, but to a writer facing a blank page, 10 minutes, we know, can feel more like an hour. So the 10 minutes will not feel like 10 minutes, but we wanted to give you a couple of writing prompts just to, maybe start you off on a new piece even, or just give you a taste of writing, in a spiritually mindful way. So I've given 3 possibilities. One would be, in the last 24 hours, where and how have I experienced God's presence or God's absence, which of course I borrowed from the Ignatian exercise of examine. Or, during COVID-19, my experience with God has been like a boom, and then find a metaphor or a simile and just keep writing. And I provided a couple of ideas: a burning fire, a garden growing, a cold, empty room. Hopefully it's not that, but it might have been. When COVID ends, I will, boom, what will you do? Fling open your door, welcome your neighborhood in, dance down the road, whatever. So we'd love for you just to take 10 minutes now, and I'm going to leave this slide up, and we will reconvene it's 2:34. So in 10 minutes, I'll call you back. So just have a little fun writing, and then we'll spend just a very few minutes sharing your best line from what you write. So nobody will read their whole piece, just one line, and or not, there's no pressure. And then we'll move into Q&A and discussion. Sharon, is there anything anyone needs to know further than that? I don't think so.
No, I think we'll just go ahead with that.
Good.
And then we'll come back when the time
Yep.
the time is ripe.
I will bellow.
Okay.
Do we go offline now?
No, just stay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sharon. Yeah, stay. Don't leave. Just stay.
Yes, just stay online, but just make sure that you're muted and enjoy the practice.